house, and if any Indian tries to stop me, I'll blast him.
You know, the only thing more pathetic than Indians on TV is Indians watching Indians on TV.
Hey everybody, what's going on? It's Ian, back again for another episode of Native Film Talk. I hope everyone's doing well. Today we will be talking about Windtalkers. Good old Windtalkers. This is the 2002 film directed by John Woo. John Woo has done other famous movies that are mostly action-based, mostly martial arts movies. His two big hitters, other than this one, that people mostly know him for, are Face Off, the John Travolta, Nick Cage movie, and then Mission Impossible 2. And he wanted to make this film because he wanted an authentic story to tell. So, and I think at this time too, I mean, there was Saving Private Ryan, Band of Brothers, Black Hawk Down. Like really in the early 2000s, we were really pushing out these war movies, and I think this was another reason just to I think it was a way, my opinion, for John Woo to leverage his way into that war movie genre, using a story that hasn't been told yet. So knowing it's a John Woo movie, it's going to be action packed. And I when I saw this as a kid, it was a big deal, massive deal. I mean, I'm Navajo, and it was bananas. Like when this movie came out, it was crazy because it was Code Talkers. Like we always heard the legendary Code Talkers, the legend of the Code Talkers, and a lot of us had relatives, had grandparents, great-grandparents who were Code Talkers. I personally had one. He passed away, unfortunately, a number of years ago, but he was the second wave of Code Talkers. There was the original 20 that were used and deployed for the war, but then they realized hey, this is really successful. We should get some more in here. And so my grandfather Lee Begay, he was in that camp, and so everybody on the res knows of a Code Talker or knows of their significance. So when this movie came out, it was huge. Flagstaff was the nearest theater that was showing it. By the time 2002 came around, the theater in my local town closed down, so Flagstaff, an hour away, was the nearest place. And man, this place was like nothing but Navajos. It was insane. The opening day, first showing, line outside the door. I've never seen lines like that at Harkins, at that theater, except for Star Wars when the 1, 2, and 3 came out, and then Lord of the Rings, but outside of those, I never saw a line like that. I mean, Harry Potter movies too, but really there usually was a lot of buzz around these movies nationally, globally, before that would warrant that kind of attention. But nope, it's just a Navajo movie, and thing was filled with Navajos, and it was pretty cool. So real quick, get this out of the way. Adam Beach is in this, so he is not Navajo. He's Canadian. He's Anishinaabe, I believe. I should have looked that one up. That's my fault. I should have got that one right exactly. But so he's not Navajo, but he understands the significance of it. He understood hey, this is a Navajo story. This is a sense of pride for these people, for this community. So I'm not going to go forward and just do this. So he was I need to ask the Navajo Nation for permission before I proceed. And so his agent was are you freaking kidding me? You serious? Just do the movie. And so he did that, got permission from the res, from the Navajo Nation. I don't know who he talked to, but somebody gave the okay with the condition that the other Navajo Code Talker in the film is played by an actual Navajo. So here enters that person is Charlie Whitehorse, the character, but go to the scene. The actual actor's name is Roger Willie. First time, I think maybe he had one tiny role in this before this, but really he's just guy they plucked off the street. He just went to an audition in Durango, Colorado. Him and a couple of his family members just kind of joked each other, coerced each other into doing it, dared each other, and he got cast. And so that was a great story. So yeah, Adam Beach, he was right off the bat, this is a Navajo story. I'm not going to do this unless I get their say so, unless I get their blessing, basically. So the Navajo Nation at the time was called upon. The language was used to craft a code. So you couldn't just speak Navajo and get the code. So they would say things like, they use an example in the film, which is like tortoise. And so they would give these key words and say like, the tortoise is moving westward. Or they would call things like ant would be like army men. And so they would have a code embedded in the Navajo language. So you had to speak Navajo and be trained in the code and what it means. And so up to this point, you're led to believe that the Japanese have been intercepting their messages, and even though they're putting it in code, the Japanese are very cunning, they're very intelligent, they're able to decipher the code and intercept where maybe their shipment runs, maybe their artillery maybe they're bombing locations, and the Japanese are avoiding those. So whatever it is, the Japanese have the tactical advantage because they're able to decipher the code that is being used by the Allies, by the Americans. So they call upon Navajos to use their language because I don't recall the gentleman's name, but he's a major at the time, but he spent some time on the res earlier in his life around Navajos, and he knew that like Navajo was not a written language, and it's not really it's not passed down or on paper, like it's an oral language. So he's like, okay, so this is a great language to use because if we make a code out of this, it's not going to be written down anywhere. The Japanese aren't going to be able to go and find a book and try to learn Navajo and then be able to decipher the code. Like it's going to work out. And so that's what happens. And then the movie doesn't touch on any of this, by the way. Like, it's one of my issues with this. But let's go ahead and go over the cast real quick. This movie is freaking long, so I apologize. The plot review is going to be a little drawn out. Normally, I would try to just focus on the pieces that have natives in it and kind of like graze over the rest of the plot, but this has like natives in the whole movie, even though we're more of a backdrop in this. But still, it's going to be a while, and then this movie is 2 hours and 14 minutes. When I saw this, I'm just like, geez. I don't remember it being this long when I was a kid, but anyway, the cast. So Adam Beach is Ben Yazzie in this. And then this is just a Navajo thing. Me, Ian, being a Navajo. Why can't people say Yazzie? Yazzie. Not Yazzie. Not Yahtzee. It's Yazzie. If you take nothing else away from this episode, Ben Yazzie. Same thing with Kayenta. People can't say Kayenta for some reason. Anyway. And then Nicolas Cage is Sergeant Joe Enders. Christian Slater is Ox Henderson. He's like another sergeant. And then Noah Emmerich is Chick. If you don't remember Chick, he's basically like the openly racist one. He's the one that takes jabs at the two Navajo guys, Ben and Charlie, in the whole movie. And then the next one, Mark Ruffalo is in this movie. If you don't remember that, you should go watch it. He's in this movie. He doesn't have a significant role. He's just kind of another soldier. But it was pretty cool to see, shout out to Mark Ruffalo. Roger Willie as Charlie Whitehorse. So, great screen name. Love this guy. Saw him. So, this movie came out in June of 2002. And the Navajo Nation Fair, which is the big fair on the res, happened in Winter Rock. It happens around September-ish, I want to say. And the movie came out in June in theaters, and he marched in the Navajo Nation Parade in September, that following, just a few months after. And so I was there with my family. I saw him in the parade. He was just walking down the street, walking down the parade route, just waving his hands at everyone, like, hey, I'm Charlie Whitehorse. I'm Roger Willie, actor. And I was just like, wow. I was starstruck. I was like, wow, that's freaking, he was in a movie with Adam Beach. He was in a movie with Nicolas Cage. That's crazy. So he actually, there was a lot of rumors going around, but I saw a YouTube video of him actually talk about his experience. He just went in the end of 1999, in December, into a casting call in Durango, and he just was passing by with his nephews and his son, and they all went in and they auditioned, and it was more of a dare, and then none of them got called back except for him, and then he eventually got another call back in LA, and I guess he's an artist on the side, so when he got phone calls to go back, he was at art shows around the country, and yeah, and then the other rumor I heard is that he was initially brought on as a language consultant, but they liked him so much that they just gave him a role. So I thought that was interesting. So there is one last thing before we jump into it. Two things actually. Rest of the cast is mostly like non-native guys. The movies are called Windtalkers. It's mostly about non-Navajos, which I'll get into for sure. But they did have one code talker on, one actual code talker. I think he was one of the original 20 also, Albert Smith. He is in the film for a brief moment. At the beginning of the movie when Adam Beach is being sent off, he's one of the guys that like shakes his hand. He says something like inaudibly in Navajo. I can't hear it. They don't translate it. And frankly, it's overpowered by like the noise of the bus and the music, so you can't really tell. But he was a language and history consultant for the film, and they gave him that small role. So let's open in the plot. Movie opens. They spent a lot of money on helicopter footage in Monument Valley. You know, a movie opens up at Monument Valley because why not? You know, like Navajos equal Monument Valley, Native Americans equal Monument Valley, I guess. I don't even know if he's from Monument Valley. They just said, hey, here's Monument Valley, and then they never explain it. And then it goes to the front of some post office. So there's really no reason to open up in Monument Valley because they don't even settle anywhere near Monument Valley. They just like show this like post office looking thing with a bunch of like Navajo ladies dressed up, like saying, and then including his wife and kid. And there's like these are all actual Navajo people, so I give them a nod for that. But there's a lot of Navajo women out there like standing out to send them off, and all of them are like rocking turquoise and velveteen shirts and skirts and silver jewelry, and their hair's they all have like tiel, they all have like weave, like yarn, you know, tying their hair. It's very like traditional outfit, and they really wanted you to know like, hey, these are Navajo people. But the real life, like, you wouldn't rock all that jewelry. You wouldn't rock everything you have in your jewelry drawer just to send somebody off to war. Like, I didn't like watching it again. I'm just like, what are they doing? Like, these ladies are dressed up like they're going to a song and dance, and he's just they're saying bye. You know, I really don't know. They don't really explain that. And then the outfits that they choose, it's like they just saw pictures from like a trading post somewhere, and they were like, yeah, that's close enough. Let's get all those Navajos dressed like that. But anyway, he gets on the bus. It's all full of Navajos. Apparently, this bus is like just driving around the res, picking up Navajos to go to war. And this is where he meets Charlie. And Charlie, they never explain how they know each other. Later on, they find out that Charlie and Ben Yazzie are apparently very close. Like they knew each other when Ben's son was born. George Washington Yazzie, when he's born, apparently Charlie did like a ceremony for him. So they have a relationship. It's not even touched on. There's like zero depth into explaining why they know each other, but they're real chummy. And this is like the only Navajo that's really spoken by these two directly. Ben, he's like, I didn't think you'd be on this bus in Navajo. And Charlie's like, didn't want your white brothers thinking you were the best we had. And then it flashes to Nicolas Cage. This is the first scene we see of Nicolas Cage in the Solomon Islands in 1943. It's a big firefight. It's a John Woo film, so it's all just action. And basically what happens is they're clearly losing the fight. They don't explain like it was due to a busted code or anything like that. They're just fighting. And Nicolas Cage is like taking people out. His people are dropping like flies. And then eventually it's just him. Like, it's just him left. And this guy, the last one that he's left with, he's like, Joe, we gotta fall back. And Joe enters. He's like, just hold the goddamn position. We just gotta hold it. You know, we were given orders. So he doesn't want to retreat. And you're led to believe that if they retreat, they'll be able to survive, all of them. But then he decides, like, I'm going to stay here. And then eventually the one guy that was with him left, he gets shot up. His last dying words were, God damn you, Joe Enders. And then Joe's hit by a grenade. The scene ends. You think he's dead because it was pretty damn close to him. But eventually we find him just in a hospital recovering and with, like, severe ear damage, and he's like got tinnitus in one ear, like ringing of the ears. He's in constant pain, and he like constantly like grabbing his ears throughout the pain or throughout the movie. And then we go back to the base. Navajos are getting off the bus, they're being sworn in, and then flash to them being in uniform. They're trying to learn the code. And in this one, this is like this is the most Navajos in the film, in this one scene in the classroom when they're all sitting there. So you're led to believe that there's a bunch of other Navajos outside of Charlie and Ben that are being trained in using the code. And that's where like Ben answers the question, or the white commanding officers up front. He's like, so what do we call a tank? And then Ben raises his hand. He's like, which is tortoise. And then Charlie Whitehorse, he's the next one. What do we call artillery? And, what did he say? And so he was like, this just becomes like a competition between the two. And it's real Navajo. It was pretty cool. Like when I was watching this in theaters with my family and a room full of Navajos, like people were cheering. They were like, this is insane. This is like real Navajo. But there also were a lot of giggles every single time Adam Beach spoke Navajo. Just want to throw that up there. I wasn't. I mean, I just thought, oh, it doesn't sound right, but there were a lot of laughs. So flash to Hawaii, this naval base where Nicolas Cage is, and he's like recovering. He's basically like being told like, you're done. Like there's no way you can go back. And this whole movie is really a Nicolas Cage movie with a Navajo guy as a sidekick. Like this, they're trying to paint him to be this like badass war hero that you can, no matter what you do, all he wants to do is fight for his country. He's got nothing to live for. He's got no family. They try to pepper in a romance in here, but he's like not having it. He doesn't want her affection. He doesn't want her care. He just wants to get back out there and fight and like validate his being, because all he is a warrior, and he has flashbacks of PTSD throughout the movie, and he just needs to continue to fight and, basically keep the demons away. So he gets with this nurse, who is nurse doctor. I'm not sure exactly what she is. They're not very clear on that, but she's a love interest. You can surmise, and he convinces her to let him cheat on one, give him like a medical clearance so he can go get an audiogram, and then helps him cheat on his audiogram to basically say like, no, he has not lost all his hearing on his ear. His hearing improved, and that raises no red flags to anyone. They're just like, okay, well, we can send him back. And then back to the classroom. And there's a lot. It's very jumpy at the beginning of the movie. And you go back to the classroom with the Navajos. They're trying to learn, like, under pressure. And you can see that Ben and Charlie are the two that are excelling the fastest. And they're the two that are going to be ready to send to war right away. So then Nick Cage is brought back into the service. And he's brought back... and they show him like training, running on a beach, and then he eventually gets to go talk to his commanding officer. And this is where we finally learn about the language. They never talk about the code talkers at any point until this part in the movie. They don't even explain what the code is when the code talkers are in the classroom. But the major Mellitz, he tells Joe Enders like, hey, we got this code that was created so the damn Japanese will stop cracking it. So this is an experiment we're going to be doing, and we need you to be the protector. So these guys are like top secret. These guys are assets. We can't let them fall into enemy hands. We can't let them die. They need to be out there helping us win the war. So Joe is like, okay. And it was like him and Christian Slater are recruited to guard Ben Yazzie and Charlie Whitehorse. So that's their main job. And he covers in this one thing. He's like, hey, if under any circumstances, if there's potential that they could be caught, you need to take them out yourself. Like, you need to kill another Marine is basically what he told them. So Major Mellitz, this is like the only time he really tells them, or that it's explained that like Navajo is the vehicle for the code. Just because you know Navajo doesn't mean that you can crack a code. He's like, take a look at this. It's a Navajo, or it was. Shows him this pictures of like this gory, tortured person that you're led to believe is a Navajo. Tortured to death by Japanese intelligence, trying to bust our code. Fortunately, couldn't help him even if he wanted to. Joe, sir? Then the major. Man's a Navajo, not a code talker. Code's based on their language, but it's still code. Tojo would like nothing more than to catch the live one. That's when he tells him, gotta protect him. And then we finally get Ben and Charlie out of boot camp or out of training, and then they finally meet Joe Enders. And, Ben, what we come to find out, Ben is a klutz throughout this entire movie until the very end. Ben has like no business being in the war. He has no business fighting in the war. He's so helpless. And the first time he meets Joe, he spills his coffee on him. And then he's like, oh, here, you can take mine. And then he spills that coffee too. And so he's just like a klutz. And then there's a random poker scene that night. And why this is significant is there's a lot of like racism, like prejudice jokes, and it's mostly from Chick, the Joel Emmerich character, and it's kind of just there to show like the discrimination that the Code Talkers went through because of the time that it was in, like the years of the World War II, like what the state of just like discrimination and racism was at the time. But there really is no purpose for it. It's just like to show like, hey, here's how messed up it was. Like there's no, I don't know. It didn't. Anyway, while they're playing poker, he's like, hey, you guys want to come play poker? And, Joe Chick was like, what, you mean Indian poker? And he's like, what is that? You hold a card over your head and the only person that can't see the card is you? And there's a lot of those stuff like that. And there's a lot of calling on like, hey, Chief, get over here. And then he sits down and you kind of hear on the sides like, hey, we take American dollars here. We don't take wampum here. So there's a lot of those really weird just things peppered in there, and that's never addressed. Like nobody's like, hey, that's messed up, man. You just kind of like have to sit with that. And then all of a sudden, Charlie Whitehorse, breaks out a flute, and he can play the flute like pretty damn well that you're led to believe. But this one, I didn't know. Like, does he need to have a flute? Like, what's the purpose of the flute? Can you even take flutes with you to war? And Christian Slater has a harmonica, and he busts that thing out randomly too. And they have this like duet later on in the film, and I'm just like, what's the purpose of that? And Christian Slater hears it, and he's just like, oh, that's beautiful. So you're led to believe that despite all this racism that's around, Christian Slater's the one that's like, hey, these people are, they got a beautiful culture. We got to respect it. So then they end up going to Saipan, finally. Or at least they're told they're going to Saipan. And everyone's hooping and hollering. Everyone's like, yeah, hell yeah, we can finally go kill some Japs, man. Like, that's really the whole tone of it. And then, like, Mark Ruffalo and the two Navajos are kind of like, oh, crap. I don't want to go. And then they focus, and then eventually they go right to Joe. Like, Joe has a flashback. He busts out of the barracks, and he, like, is in pain or whatever. And, like, every time that Ben Yazzie, Adam Beats, tries to get close to Nick Cage, he always pushes him away. He's always like, oh, you stupid Indian, what are you doing? You're useless. Like, shoot there, do this. Like, Adam is not capable of doing anything for himself unless he's explicitly told to do it by Joe Enders, who's Nick Cage. And they really have this, like, white savior complex. They really lean into this. So it appears like a year's passed then from the time they went to the barracks to then. And there's a massive war scene, like crazy amounts of money, crazy amounts of like, there's a lot of people. There's a lot of human bodies, like real people they cast for this massive war scene. There's like planes everywhere. Artillery is exploding all over the place. There's organs on display. It's very very much like Saving Private Ryan. And this is just the Joe Ender show. This is just the Nick Cage show. Everyone's capable of getting shot except for him. And he kills so many people. He doesn't even need to aim. Like, watching this again, it's kind of comical. Like, he just sprays and prays, like hip fires and just like, just from his hip. And then with that, like 10 people fall down. And so he's like yelling in slow motion. It's very like Rambo-esque. And Ben's not having it. Ben's like shell-shocked. It's like the first time he's ever seen war. He's like, what? A gun? I don't know how to use that. Which end does the bullet come out of? And he's just like scared and cowering. And the whole time, like, Joe is just yelling at him, like, follow me, stay on my ass, And he's just like, I said stay on my ass. And he's just like, he's just getting mad at Ben the whole time. And that's the only time we ever see any native in action, even though this is a Code Talker movie. And then, so you get to a point where it's like, okay, now let's use the code. Let's finally use the code. The whole reason why we're doing this movie. The Japanese have a controlled high ground, and they're at a hill that they can't get past. People are going and trying to get up there, and they need artillery support. And this is where it doesn't make sense to me. Just call in artillery support, right? You don't need to use a code. Like, if you called it in English, that battleship is still going to face the cannons over to where they're moving. Like, they're not going to intercept it fast enough to where they're like, oh no, they're calling in our location. We got to move. Like, it wasn't clear to me what the benefit of the code was. I'm sure it's more intricate, and maybe a history podcast at some point. Maybe I'll get schooled on like how exactly it was used. But you could have just done it in English and had the exact same scene. Like, I didn't get the gravity of the code's significance. But anyway, they do it. Some old like recycled battleship destroyer footage is used, and then that's it. And then it just becomes the Joe Enders show again. Like, they actually use Navajo, though. They actually, he's speaking Navajo. He gives him the coordinates of, like, where to fire. He repeats it in Navajo, like the longitude and latitude. He repeats the numbers, gives it to Charlie. Charlie says it to the battleship. And then, boom, they show it. They basically, that's the only time they show how the code works. And then the next thing you see is, like, more battles. This is a long movie, like I said. But then flash forward to that night when everybody's done and finally at the camp. They're doing a protection way ceremony. Charlie is doing it for Ben. So we're led to believe later on that Ben or Charlie is like a medicine man of some kind. Like, he does understand like how to conduct these ceremonies. So he's doing a protection way ceremony. He's saying it all in Navajo. They're kind of translating it, but not really. And he has the ash smeared on his face, and Christian Slater and Nick Cage are just like being typical outsider kind of dialogue of like, what the hell are they doing? I don't know. What does it look like they're doing? I don't know, but they've been doing that since sundown. And then so he asks him about it the next day of just like, so what the hell was that? And Ben Yazzie, Adam Beach is just trying to tell him like, hey, I froze yesterday and I'm sorry. Like, there's genies out there. Like, seeing death it got to me. Seeing that like really messed up my head, and I'm not going to freeze again. And they really diminish it. Like, I think this dialogue is very unnecessary, but he was just like, Ben's like, Sergeant, what I'm telling you is I won't freeze up again. And Joe says, because your buddy smeared some ash on your forehead. And Ben, that's right, because my buddy smeared ash on my forehead. And so he just like refuses to understand that these people have culture, that these people have like a religion tied to their culture, that there's a spiritualism to it that he can't understand. He just like, oh yeah, whatever, some ash on the forehead. But anyway, I digress. So next scene, Ben's at a lake, and this is another like white people are racist scene. He like has his shirt off, just like bathing in the lake, and then chick comes and he's like, you look like a Japanese person. The only thing separate you from a Japanese is that uniform. And then just basically like plays keep away with all his clothes. And eventually they get into a big fight. And then Chick just ends up like overpowering Ben, even though he had the upper hand at first. And Mark Ruffalo tries to come in and save him, and he can't. Like, Chick is just this monster. He's just like pounding away at Ben. And then, of course, Nick Cage comes in, saves the day. Minimal effort, like a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, just comes in, does this simple move, and it looks like effortless, and he eventually just like takes him out. And he says like, oh, he was like, Mark Ruffalo's character asked Ben, he's like, Ben, are you okay? And Chick was like, Ben, what? Ben? I thought it was a nip. I thought he was a Japanese guy. And so that's this scene. While it seems unnecessary, it's important because later on, Ben dresses up as or pretends to be a Japanese person, puts on the uniform because he quote unquote looks like a Japanese soldier, so they can get reinforcements. So I'll just go straight to that battle. They're walking in the middle of a field, and they just start getting pelted with freaking artillery fire. They're like, where the hell is this coming from? Like, I don't see any enemies. And they realize that they're getting shot at by Japanese and getting hit by their own people. And so they're like the only radio that was available. Adam Beach had it on his back, and he got during all of the commotion and when they first started getting pelted, his radio got hit, and so it's down. They have no way of contacting the Americans to let him know. And so they're like, everyone's dying left and right. And so they finally planned, it's like, hey, there's radios in that Japanese base. Let's get over there. Let's pretend to have Joe be a prisoner. Let's put Ben in the Japanese uniform and then just go over there. And so that happens. They're successful. And then they call a ceasefire. They redirect their coordinates to where the Japanese actually are. And it's not in English. Not in code. He's just like telling them in English, and then they just redirect it. And Ben Yeah. And that scene seemed kind of unnecessary. You could have had anybody do that. I guess you needed it because he looked Japanese, but I don't know. Like, he's too valuable of an asset. You spend the whole movie saying, like, if he ever falls into enemy hands, you got to shoot him. And then the first thing you do is, like, he's going to pretend to be a Japanese person. So that way he can get under the undercover and get close enough so we can use their radios. I don't know. But after this scene, it's good because Nick Cage and Ben have bonded. Like, he views him as an equal. He tells his superior after that scene, he's just like, I can't do my job. Nicolas Cage is like, I like Ben now. You know, he's a real person. He's got culture. He's got, you know, he's capable. I'm not going to kill another Marine if he ever gets captured. And he's just like, you know, do your damn job, basically. And then what happens next? So there's one scene I forgot. After the fight at the lake, Ben, he tells him his clans. You know, he's like, I'm born for the Bitterwater people. You know, or I'm Bitterwater clan, born for the Towering House clan. And I thought that was interesting when he says that. He's like, I'm not just an Indian. You know, I'm Navajo, born of the Bitterwater people, and I'm Bitterwater clan, born for the Towering House clan. When that happened, when that line happened in the theater, the Navajos went crazy. It was like a Marvel Avengers scene when like everyone goes crazy. Like when he said that we were up in arms. It was not up in arms. It was an uproar. Like we were excited when he said his clans, which you would never do. I would never tell a non-Navajo person what my clans are, even if I was trying to like make a testament to like, hey, I'm Navajo, you know, douche, I'm Navajo. I would say Diné, maybe that's the most I would never tell it. I don't know, whatever. So the village. Gosh, this movie is so long. So I'll try to be as quick as possible through all this. So eventually they get to a point where they start swapping stories. You know, Joe Enders and Ben Yazzie. They start talking about, hey, here's my Catholic school. Oh, you're Catholic? Me too. I was raised Catholic. They got a bunch of those on the res. And then you start to just like peel back the layers of how like messed up it was for Navajos at the time, because Ben talks about, well, when I was your age, or when I was at the age you're talking about for that Catholic story, at 12, you know, I was chained to the radiator in the basement for a couple of days because I wasn't allowed to speak Navajo. And I forgot one day. And so the nuns, they punished me and put me down in the basement and had me, you know, there for 2 days. And you hear that. And, you know, Joe is just trying to paint a picture of like, oh, I didn't really believe in Catholicism. I was forced to go. And you hear Ben's story, you're just like, Jesus Christ, man. Are you serious? But then that's it. They don't address it. You know, I wish they told that story more, because that tells the real hypocrisy of the United States government calling upon people that they have institutionally tried to eradicate their culture, restrict them of their language through religion and through boarding schools. Like, they tried to strip all of that from Navajo people for generations. You know, from us being a part of the Department of War, you know, the Bureau of Indian Affairs used to be under the Department of War, so because it was kill the Indian, save the man. They don't touch on any of that. The hypocrisy of having years of governmental just action and policy to try to strip us from our land, separate us from our homeland, separate us from everyone else, make us yeoman farmer like lifestyles, to disconnect us from our culture and strip us of our language in boarding schools, and then eventually to have a Navajo called upon, or Navajo people to called upon to use their language that for years the government tried to strip from us and have been frankly successful compared to like where we are right now. Like, none of that was touched on. It was just like, hey, they're these Navajo people. We gotta have them, you know, help us win this war. So, and then what happens next is like, so this is the big scene where Charlie Whitehorse dies. But they end up holding up at this village, and Ben gets called away. He's like, hey, Ben, we need you to do a quick translation somewhere. I need to take you over the hill. So Joe doesn't go with him. And as soon as he leaves, there's a big ambush that happens. And the whole village is overrun. You know, of course, Joe lives. But Christian Slater and Charlie Whitehorse, they end up dying. Charlie Whitehorse actually gets his head freaking cut off by a samurai sword, which came out of nowhere. But and in this scene, oh my gosh, Charlie. So Ben looks like a lame duck. We never see Charlie in action. Charlie Whitehorse is a bad ass. Like this is a so this is why this guy was my hero. I mean, one, he was an actual Navajo. He spoke clean Navajo, but man, he was so cool in this movie. He all of a sudden had this freaking knife that was in a buckskin kind of like sheath, and this handle that was made out of a horn from something. You assume it's like an elk. And out of nowhere, Chick, the racist one, is about to get killed. And then Charlie sees him, and he make it seem like Charlie's gonna try to kill Chick. He grabs that knife out of his sheath, and he throws it and right by Chick's head, and it lands right into a Japanese person's heart. And that essentially, what we learn later, basically like cures Chick's racism. He's like, oh well, I guess these natives ain't so bad after all, and he learns perspective. But in this scene, no joke, Charlie is like, he's killing people left and right, shooting them, stabbing them, and I'm like, man, go Charlie, go Charlie. But he ends up getting captured after Christian Slater dies. Like, they just get overrun. And then the Japanese like, hold on, he looks special. He looks like he might be a code talker. We need to interrogate him. And then so Joe Enders, Nick Cage, comes along. He's like, I remember my orders. And he kind of holds out a grenade, and he sees Charlie. Charlie gives him the okay of like, just do it, man. Like, there's no way I'm going to go freaking get captured and taken into custody by these people. Be a prisoner of war. And so he kills him. Throws a grenade in, and Charlie ends up getting blown up with all those Japanese guys. And Ben comes back, and he's pissed because he holds Joe responsible. Because Joe comes back, he's like, hey, or Ben, he's like, hey, Enders, I can't find Whitehorse anywhere. Have you seen him? And Joe, he's still shell-shocked. He's like, he's over there. And then Ben goes over, and he sees his friend blown up, with all the other Japanese people. He's like, this was supposed to be a secured area. What happened? And Joe's like, I killed him. You what? I took a grenade. And I threw it in there, and I blew him up. And he was like, what? Are you freaking kidding me? I mean, it's more complicated than that, but that's all he tells him. So after that, Ben's pissed. Ben is like, holds Joe responsible for the death of his friend. But for some reason, he becomes a badass after this. He's got like no care in the world now. He lost his will to live, it seems. Like as soon as the next battle, he's like leading the charge. He's shooting Japanese left and right. He's like leading the way, and Nick Cage is like, calm down, man, what the heck, what got into you? And he's still just charging away. And so this leads up eventually to the last scene of the movie, where Ben is, our last war scene in the movie. Ben's still on this like warrior kick. He's still pissed off at Joe, and they get ambushed. They get overrun, and their little group that they're in, everyone's dying. So it's just really a callback to the beginning of the movie at the Solomon Islands when Joe Enders, where everyone dies except for him. It seems it's going to be like that, where like they could fall back, but really they just end up getting ambushed, overrun. Everybody dies except for Joe and Ben. It's just those two. They're like, all right, man, I guess this is it. And then Ben gets shot in the leg. And you're like, crap, I guess it's over, and at this point, Ben knew, because after Joe killed Charlie, he told Adam Beach, he told Ben Yazzie, like, hey, my orders are to protect the code at all costs. That's why I had to do it. And it's another reason why he's pissed. He's like, I thought we were friends. I thought we were having a good relationship building, and, you just care about the code. You just care about, protecting, your own reputation and whatever. So at this point at the end where Joe and Ben are like left, Ben puts the gun up, Joe's gun up to his chest. He's like, just do it, man. Just get it over with. And out of nowhere, Joe just gets this like second wind. He's like, no, man, we can do it. I'm not going to have the Solomon Islands recreate. I'm not going to lose everyone because Ben Yazzie, he says the same thing. Just like, damn you, Joe Enders. It's the same line that was used at the beginning of the film. And then he picks up Ben on his shoulders and just like runs to safety. And as they run to safety, out of nowhere, the reinforcements come. How convenient, right? But reinforcements come, they take out all those Japanese. And they make it, and Ben was just like, "Holy crap, man! I had your gun barrel pressed up to my chest. I wanted you to shoot me. Like, we made it. I can't believe we freaking made it." And then he looks over, and Joe has a fatal wound. Like, he's done. He got shot in the chest, and he's just like, "God damn it, Joe." He's like, "We saved a lot of Marines today." You know, he's like, "You were supposed to come to the res, meet my wife, meet my son, George Washington Yazzie." And then Joe apologizes for Charlie, and his dying words are the Hail Mary prayer. And then Joe dies. And then it goes back to Monument Valley, because why not? And they're on this ledge. I don't know why they're on this ledge overlooking Monument Valley, but they're there, and it's Ben, his wife, and his son. And he's all dressed up in like traditional Navajo male outfit. He's got the headband on, velvet shirt, and he's doing a prayer and washing Joe's dog tags. And in a Navajo basket, he's praying to the four directions with it. And then the movie ends, basically, after that. And the movie ends with an American flag on a battleship, and it's just like blowing in the wind, and the words come up: "The Navajo code was vital in the victory at Saipan and every major battle in the Pacific." And then you think, like, great, the next thing they're going to do is probably show a picture of, like, the code talkers now, of what they look like, maybe the original 20 or what they really look like. You know what they do after this? They go to a next scene, and it has Nicolas Cage running in slow motion on the beach from earlier in the movie, and a bunch of white soldiers in unison marching behind him. And then it says, "The code was never broken." And then the movie finally ends. So, I liked this movie when I was a kid. My gosh, this is a total, like, white savior movie. It's not even white savior, it's just like, tell the right story. Why do you show a fictional character, a white fictional character, after you talked about how the code was unbreakable, as to say, like, yes, the code was unbreakable. We are forever indebted to the Navajo people we called upon them to utilize their language to help us win World War II. It's like, no, the actual message they wanted to say was, we were successful because of white soldiers. We were successful because, regardless of the code, we needed white red-blooded Americans to carry out the task. At least show the picture of an actual code talker in the film. There's plenty of them. And even use an old picture, like the famous one when he's like actually talking into the radio, like relaying code. Like, at least have that picture up instead of Nicolas Cage running in slow motion on a beach. So the positives. I'll go with positive, negatives, the small bit of costume, and then final thoughts. Positives. Despite everything, this is a Navajo story. This is like the first time it was ever in a major motion picture, so I liked it in that regard. Actual Navajo is spoken. Actual code, too. They actually did some research and I just wish there was more of it, and I wish there was more context given to, like, how it was used and what tactical advantage you were given. But it was great to see an attempt. That this is the first time they ever tried to tell this story in a movie and recognize the contribution to the success in World War II for the U.S. And Adam Beach was woke, man. I mean, he asked for permission. He didn't have to do that. Adam Beach will always have a special place in my heart. Once I heard that story, I mean, he was already one of the goats to me. But when I heard that, I'm just like, man, good for you, Adam. Like, you're freaking awesome. Thank you so much for doing that. Like, I don't know if any other Native actors would have, maybe, but just like that shows his awareness and respect, and he's just like, he's a real one. And last positive, Charlie was a freaking warrior. Charlie Whitehorse, I mean, he only acted in a few other things after this, but man, Roger Willie, like the real life guy, like, he seems like he's just a casual, like, artist Navajo. Like, he's not. He wasn't, like, classically trained in any kind of acting at all, but in this movie, he was a badass. He's a living legend to me. Like, he was like Navajo, speaking Navajo in a multi-million-dollar film. Like, this grossed, like, I think almost $100 million. It's a John Woo film. You had a Navajo in a John Woo film. It's crazy. So the negatives. This is an incomplete tale. They really told the war story from, like, the Joe Enders, Christian Slater lens. Even though it's a code talker movie, we were accessories. it doesn't show how the code was really needed. It just talks about like, hey, we need this code and it's unbreakable, and that's it. Show like what I would have liked to see is like if they do that Solomon Islands scene at the beginning of the movie where Nicolas Cage is getting blown up and all his buddies die and it's just him. Maybe show like how using regular English code was unsuccessful, and that's why Joe Enders ended up dying, or that's why his whole crew ended up dying, why he got hit with that grenade. They don't even explain what it was like before the code got there. They just say, hey, it's busted, we got to bring these Navajos in. Instead, they just jump to the solution. And really, this is a Nicolas Cage movie. Like, Ben isn't cut out for war. The message is like Navajos aren't warriors outside of Charlie, and we need white people to fight it for us. There's very little explanation about the code. That's gonna, yeah, that one bothered me. And then Code Talkers were on the front line. I get it. It's a movie. You're gonna embellish some things. There's gonna be hyperbole, but they talk about how we're assets this entire movie. Like Navajo, these Navajos, you gotta protect them. You gotta protect them. And they're on the front lines. I watched a review episode of this guy. He does like military reviews where he's like an actual veteran that spent time, multiple tours overseas. So he'll like watch war scenes in movies and he'll just like review the accuracy. And he says this is not accurate. Like grenades can blow up tanks in this movie, and he's like, that's not true. And he talks about like the code being relayed. He said that was genuine. Like how they did that, that's pretty darn accurate. But he's like, but his main observation was, you would not put Navajo Code Talkers at the front lines. Those are your biggest assets. There's only 20 of those guys. You would not have them in the heat of war like that. You would have them further back because you want to make sure that they're safe. And another negative, gosh, this movie's long. This movie's long. And they didn't talk about how the Navajos couldn't talk about it. You know, like this was a classified program. When this war was over, the government wanted to keep this code secret, so they didn't declassify the project until like I think in the 60s. And so the Navajos that were in the war and fought hard and weren't decorated until like 2011. They were just like, I'm just doing my job, and when you go back, you can't tell anybody that you used Navajo to fight and win the war. They weren't allowed to tell anybody. Like, that's a huge deal. Still, you were called upon to help, but you can't even talk about the contributions that you had during the war because it's a classified program. We might need you to use the code again. So, I get it, though. Christian Slater, John Woo, Nicolas Cage, you got to put butts in the seats. You got to sell the film. If it was Navajo directed, Navajo acted, in 2002, it would have been a much lower budget film. I try to not be too picky like with this stuff, but this one, I feel like there was so much opportunity to get it right. You know, I mean, this was supposed to be about Code Talkers. Instead, the focus is on the world building of Nicolas Cage and learning about his history, his relationships with people, and Christian Slater. And Adam Beach is like, I don't know. Like, we don't know anything about him. Is he from Monument Valley? What's his kid? I mean, we learned a cute little story about, you know, his kid, George Washington Yazzie, but, like, his wife, like, where's his wife's family from? What is he going to tell his family after he gets home? Like, what he's done? Like, have him talk about why, like, hey, the hypocrisy of using Navajo when in boarding school I was freaking had this beat out of me that Navajo is like a sin and Navajo is not holy and I should be speaking English only. Like, talk about that, because that's the real crap, you know? In 2002, after this came out, they would ask, I tried watching some interviews with Adam Beach, and they would ask silly questions like, this really, like these non-native interviewers, they would have like John Woo, Nick Cage, and Adam Beach sitting there in the panel. They would ask him questions. And Adam Beach, he's very like respectful and tries to just, you know, anytime we're asked about Navajo, he's like, it's a very hard language. His exact words were, in regards to learning Navajo, the interviewer asked her, you know, like, was it hard learning Navajo? You aren't Navajo. Was it hard for you to learn it? And it's like, would you ever ask anybody that of any other language? I think they just made this connection of like, oh, he's native. It must have been easier for him to learn it. Like, would you ever ask anyone like, hey, you had to learn Spanish for this film. Was that hard for you? Yeah, no effing, Of course it was. It's a brand new language. Of course it was hard. And Adam Beach verbatim, he said, the Navajo language is a very difficult language to learn. It has this rhythm that's hard to catch. They use a lot of the throat, nasal, and this clicking of the tongue. And the rhythm is very slow. The rhythm they have has this long drawl. But I think I pulled it off pretty good. And he said he got help from Roger Willie and the actual code-talker Albert Smith in the movie. They helped him a lot. So I'm almost there. Make Roger Willie the main guy. I get it, you got to put butts in the seats, but you got Nick Cage, you got Christian Slater, and this isn't a knock against, I guess maybe it is, kind of. But not even make him a main guy, but just focus on him more. He's an actual Navajo. But it's not a Hollywood thing to give him a chance. Roger Willie had no filmography before this. He had no roles before this. I guess they just don't trust us enough, or he needed to be more established. But the only takeaway I have is like it was still kill the Indian, save the man kind of thing. It was like, hey, kill the Indian, save the code. Navajos are expendable. We can always get more Navajos. We can't get more code. The only time we can, only if you ever get to a point where the code is susceptible to be falling into enemy hands, you take those Navajos out. While that was a crude story to tell, that's 100% true. 1,000%. You know for a fact that conversation actually happened. It was like, these Navajos are expendable. We gotta freaking save the code to win this war. I think overall, though, this is just an okay movie. Like, as a war movie, there's much better ones. There's Saving Private Ryan, there's the Band of Brothers TV series, there's Black Hawk Down. Where it sets itself apart is it tries to tell a story specifically about the code-talkers, and I think it really tries to, but it doesn't even do that very well. And they made this movie like Navajo language is a prop. It's not there. It's like, we won this war because of Americans like Joe Enders, not because of Ben Yazzie. Gosh. I come from a long line of veterans. My two grandparents, they both were Korean War vets. My dad's a Marine. I have two uncles that are Marines and an army in the army, like a Desert Storm vet and Operation Iraqi Freedom. So, like, I have a long line of military veterans in my family. And so the fact that they cast these natives to be just less than and like needed protectors and like they were just babe in the woods, like they can't do anything. Like, really, at times you would think that Adam like would have to be held, almost like Christian Bale's character Thomas in Pocahontas, where like John Smith can do everything and Thomas is just like a klutz, and he's like, hey, you do the bullet comes out of this end, you pull the trigger, and then that makes the gun go boom. Make sure you're looking down the crosshairs, and get the guy in between the crosshairs. That's how you end up killing somebody. Like, it had to be that explained for Adam Beach to be useful, because he wasn't useful in this movie until like the only time he was useful is when he used the code, and I just didn't appreciate that. And what is this fascination with Monument Valley? I don't understand that. They spent a lot of money on helicopter footage in Monument Valley. It's not even like, and this is just me, I'm from the western side of the res, there's like no cultural significance to Monument Valley that I know of. Maybe I'm just from the wrong side of the res. But like, they used Spider Rock or Ship Rock, like that would have been better. Like, Monument Valley is just a tourist attraction. And I'm sure there's like Navajos from Monument Valley that have like cultural significance to that area. But explain that. If that's culturally relevant to Ben Yazzie's character, explain it. Don't just show up in Monument Valley and be like, hey, it's the Wild West. That's where Navajos are from. Monument Valley. So, if Ian was given the reins of this film, here's how a better story. Same cast, same everything, but make Adam Beach the leading character. Show him as a kid. That boarding school story that he told, show that. Show that nun like tying him to the basement radiator for 2 days because he spoke Navajo. You know, show what they did to him in Catholic boarding school. Show how the government, wanted to eradicate us from our culture. They wanted to strip us from the land by removing us our culture. Kill the Indian, save the man. And then eventually go to him getting called upon in the draft. Being drafted to use his language. Talk more about how they developed the language, the code. And then you can pepper in the war stuff later. But John Woo, he wanted to make a war movie. He wanted to make an American war movie. And I really think that's all this was about. This was his opportunity to tell a story that hadn't been told, but also, more importantly, make a war movie. Starring Nicolas Cage, who he already worked with on Face Off, so they had a good relationship. Excuse me. And then how are you going to make a movie about code talkers, only have 2 actual Navajos that have speaking roles in the film? And then the one real Navajo you have, like actual Navajo, you kill them off, There's a lot of natives in this film that don't ever talk. There's the classroom full of them. They never have a speaking role. There's one on the battleship that's like actually intercepting the message, and he says like, "Hongwashi," like that's all he says. Like, okay, got it. But this movie didn't age well for me. It was awesome when I was a kid. And it still is to a regard because I hold a special place in this in my heart because of that experience, because of being in that theater with a bunch of other Navajos, and we're like basically just like thrilled to see, like we felt heard for the first time. It's like you could feel these people just like, it's about freaking time. Like, oh yes, they're telling a great story, and you see a Navajo on screen actually speaking Navajo, and even though it's like partially misrepresented, there's like some things that are embellished and were not represented in the best light, and it's an incomplete story. It was never done before, so you're watching this and you're just excited. You're like almost in tears because you're just like, somebody said Towering House Clan, Bitterwater Clan on TV, on a movie. Like, I can buy this DVD and Adam Beach and Nicolas Cage, they say Towering House Clan, they say Bitterwater Clan, and you're just like, oh my god, this is crazy. Someone named Yazzie is a leading man in a movie. Someone with a last name Yazzie and last name Whitehorse. So you can see, like, I'm torn. Like, this movie, it didn't age well. Like, you watch it now, it's 18 years old. It's not that good, in my opinion. It's a little too long. But this was a moment in history for Navajo people, for Native people, where it's just like, man, this is crazy. Hollywood made the attempt. I'll give them that. This movie's really gory. It's a war movie, but they really got a lot of gore in this. There's a lot of explosions. It's not really about Navajos when you look at it. It's more of like a America film. Of just like, look at how great America is. There's better war movies out there. And there's better documents of our contributions to the war of like Navajo people, like Code Talkers. I mean, they're documentaries, but there's better stuff out there. And I'll probably post some of that on the website or on Instagram. So that's pretty much it. Well, okay, so the last one. I need to remember to do this. Will I show this to my son? I would like to, because of the experience I had. I would like for him to know my story and what it was like when this came out and how it was received. But I'm going to have to do a lot of explaining because there's a lot of incomplete stuff in this movie. But yeah, I'm going to show it to him and be like, hey, this was a moment in history, son. Like, this was a moment in history. And for the Navajo Nation, this was a big deal. And I'll talk about Roger Willie. Man, who knows? Maybe I'll run into him someday, or might see him in something and be like, that's the guy from Windtalkers, son. Like, and he'll be able to know what that is. I think that would be amazing. That'd be cool. Because that's like the big positive. Roger Willie was freaking awesome. He was cool. He was so cool in this movie. Because I saw like he was an actual Navajo from the res. He wasn't like a Hollywood actor. Like, he just seemed like my uncle, like one of my uncles. Like, he was just exactly like that, and I really appreciated that. It's cool. All right, so this plot took a while. We're almost at an hour. I think I'm barely going to run over. I'll close with the last thing. I'm going to try to do a couple more episodes I'm really debating whether I'm going to do Fargo next and talk about the movie. There's a short role where Shep Proudfoot, he's a native guy. They don't really talk about it. They don't really talk about his culture at all, or his tribal affiliation. But it's native representation, and I thought it was pretty interesting. So I might review that one next. Smoke Signals. I'm really not too sure right now where I'm going to take this one, but I will do a review, like a reflection episode, and probably after that, whatever I decide to do next, because a month in, a lot's changed. I got a new rig, we got some new followers, we got everything up, and just talk about like, hey, 1 month in, what's it been like? So, yeah. That was Windtalkers. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I really appreciate all your support. Those of you that have listened to multiple episodes, I just appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. Those of you that are first-time listeners, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to really just like see if you like me, and see if you like what you hear, the content that I'm pushing out. And this goes out to everybody. If you have any suggestions of what you would like to see in this podcast, whether it's audio quality or guests, content, reviews, anything. If you have thoughts on the film that I'm about to review, let me know. I just really want to make this fun, because this is fun for me. I really enjoy doing this. This is a blast. It's a lot of work at times, but man, it doesn't feel like work. Like, it's one of those, it's a labor of love. Like, I really just love doing this. It's so much fun just watching movies and talking about it. All right, everybody. That's all I have. Talk to you later.